Hello, everyone. This is the 91st episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog, and I'm joined by Paul from Shipley in England and the 1888 Letter blog. For this episode, we interview Brazilian football fan Mr. Stanley Cunha as we discuss the Brazil national team under Sebastião Lazaroni in the year 1989. Mr. Cunha is the Brazilian club Atlético Mineiro's supporters ambassador in New Jersey. Welcome, Stanley. Good to have you here.
Thank, thank you, guys. Thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to talk about soccer. So I think we're gonna have a good time.
Indeed.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Could you just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your history with football?
This is funny because my passion about soccer or football started naturally on the street, like most of the Brazilians, because my parents they didn't like soccer, football. Sorry. And so when I was playing with the kids on the street, and most of them or all of them were playing football, so that caught my attention, and I started playing with them, and then I played until I played for small clubs in small leagues in a small town from the age of 8 until I was 14 years old. So during that period, the football caught my attention very hard. I can say that I played every day. I watched every single game during the weekends. On that time, there was no cable TVs, so I can probably say that I watched 90% of the games that were broadcasted by TV. And I am Brazilian, so was born and raised in Brazil. I moved to United States 4 years ago. I kept the passion. I still watching games. As you said, I am a Atlético Mineiro fan and ambassador here. So I'm trying to uh, get the fans together to watch games and yeah, make friends and keep the passion on.
So let's go back in time. Can you describe the state of the affairs with the Brazilian national team post Tele Santana and after the 1986 World Cup?
The bad results that we got in 1982 and 1986, so this really impacted the Brazilian people, the Brazilian press, and forced CBF to try to change the soccer or football environment uh, in every aspect. So they started uh, changing the coaches and to bring something new. And the generation that came after 1982 and 1986 was not as good as the previous generation. So uh, they realized uh, that they had to make changes on the team to renew the players as well, not only the coaches. And so it was frustrating. It was a frustration for the press and the team, the results on 82 and 86. That was led CBF to assign Lazzaroni as the main coach.
So, with the era of Zico and Socrates and Falcao over, how was Lazzaroni's appointment regarded by the Brazilian public and press in early 1989?
It, the public and press didn't receive it very well. Mostly uh, the people outside Rio. Lazzaroni had a good results in Rio. He had won three championships in Rio with Flamengo and Vasco. three championships in a row. The championship of the state of Rio. The press, the public and press outside Rio didn't receive it very well. So because of some states they preferred somebody else. In Minas, they preferred to keep, for example, Carlos Alberto Silva, which was the previous coach before Lazaroni, right before Lazaroni. São Paulo had another names. Rio Grande do Sul had another names. I'm talking about the states that had in that time the biggest clubs, around 70% of the biggest clubs in the league, right? And the idea that Lazzaroni could change the tactics, because that was an idea that already came up. They stated that they had to change the something on the team, and it was not well received by the public and press in general.
So upon his appointment, Lazzaroni was vocal about the idea of Europeanizing Brazilian football. What were the initial reactions from the press and the public when someone so openly wants to take a break from Jogo Bonito?
The press and public didn't receive it well. But we should point out that that generation uh, had no good midfielders. I mean, not as skilled as the previous midfielders, right? So I think I personally think that they demanded something that Lazzaroni couldn't provide, right? That's my feeling because the or midfielders at that time were not that good comparing to the biggest stars like Zico, Rivellino, Gerson, and so on. About the European game, the, the public and press didn't receive it very well because they already the first thing that came up on our minds was that the Jogo Bonito will be over, right? So the press hit him hard with this, like demanding that we should keep the jogo bonito at the same time as we should reinforce the defensive line as well, the defensive system, because they people in at that time people thought that the previous teams 1982 and 86, the main aspect that affected the seleção was the defense, right? So it was a mix between demanding him o jogo bonito, the jogo bonito, and at the same time demanding a more defensive system, a more, I would say, a defensive system more consistent.
And we also have to point out that this was not the first time that this had been tried out. I mean, Zagallo in 1974 and Coutinho in 1978 had had unsuccessfully tried to adapt to the European style of play. So perhaps some of the press and the public had already seen this before, and that's why they were reticent about again yet another attempt to Europeanize the Brazilian game.
This is my opinion, right? My point of view. I believe that the Brazilian game during the 60s and 70s were so dominating that I believe the people were not accustomed to see the other teams improving as much as possible to face Brazil very well. That's my opinion. So teams like Netherlands in 74 and 78, when things like that came up. Germany had a lot of good players during those years too. Argentina with a very strong team, and Italy with an amazing team in 1982. So when they started to play, when they started to see teams like that, so they thought, okay, what do they have different from us? And I believe the tactics was something that uh, stuck on the Brazilian press and Brazilian public and the CBF board as as something that they were doing different comparing to Brazil. Of course, I believe that the tactics should always be improved. We always should update the game. I mean, when I say we, it's not only Brazil, it's everyone, right? This combined with the fact that we were between a very good generation and another very good generation that would come up in the future. So that generation, the Lazaroni generation, was I would say a crop of players, right, between one generation and the other. So for that generation, I would say that they didn't realize that that generation wasn't good enough. Technically saying. So they started to think another to how to balance the team to face the Europeans that came up with very good teams. But it was something that came up naturally. I would say. I mean, it was not thinking. It was not like a plan, right? So that's why the European system was not well received by the public and press because the public and press were expecting to have very skilled players adapted or adapting to the very good systems playing that had been played in Europe. But they didn't realize that it was not the system itself that provided Europeans to have a good teams. It was a combination. They had their system to face the good or the best Brazilian teams during the 60s and 70s, combined with a good generation that came up for them during those years. That's what I think.
Let's go through the first matches of the Lazzaroni era. For the first few matches, I would say up until the Copa America, Lazzaroni did not have access to the European based stars. So you have locally based players for the first few matches as he's trying out some players and experimenting. And then with the tour of Europe in June, he has access to some European based players, but not all of them. So we'll look at these matches, and just to let everyone know, you will be hearing me saying the number of caps of some players. Now we have to remind everyone these numbers may not be entirely accurate because in some sources, matches against club teams are considered official, or matches with the Olympic team or the representative matches. So the numbers that I gave may not be entirely accurate as far as the number of caps. The first match of a Lazzaroni era was on March 15th, 1989, against Ecuador at Cuiabá. So for this match, Brazil won 1-0, Washington scoring in the 19th minute. And this was a match where Bebeto was sent off in the 40th minute. So looking at the lineup, in goal, you have Acacio of Vasco da Gama. The captain of the team is Jorginho of Flamengo. You have João Batista of Atlético Mineiro. He's replaced by Aldair of Flamengo. You have André Cruz of Ponte Preta. Eduardo of Fluminense. Uidemar of Goiás. He'll be replaced by Zedo Carmo of Vasco da Gama. Giovanni of Vasco da Gama, Toninho of Portuguesa, he replaced by Vivinho of Vasco da Gama, Bebeto of Flamengo, Washington of Garani, Zinho of Flamengo, and he replaced by Joao Paulo of Garani. So these were for players such as Acacio, Aldair, Vivinho, and Zinho, among others. This was their first cap for the Brazilian national team. As far as Toninho, this was his one and only cap for Brazil. And for Joao Batista, this was his seventh and final cap. His first cap had been in 1987. Same with Demar. This was his second and final cap. His first cap had been in 1987. Next, we have another friendly on April 12th against Paraguay at Teresina. This was a match where Brazil won 2-0. Cristóvão scored in the 80th minute and Vivinho in the 88th minute. The Brazilian lineup for this match is Acacio, Jorginho, captain again, Aldair, Andre Cruz, Eduardo. Making his international debut is Bismarck of Vasco da Gama, another debutant, Bernardo of Sao Paulo, another debutant, Bobo of Sao Paulo. He'd be replaced by debutant Cristóvão of Grêmio in the 74th minute. Bebeto, Washington, he'd be replaced by Vivinho in the 66th minute. Zinho, he replaced by Joao Paulo in the 74th minute. For Eduardo, this was his fifth and final cap. His first cap had been 1987. Same with Washington. This was his fifth cap, and his first cap had been in 1987.
The first game, there's a guy, Toninho, that played for Portuguesa. He's Sonny Anderson brother. Just a curiosity.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, wow. Oh, I didn't know that.
Sonny Anderson.
Yeah, to remind everyone, Lyon, Monaco. Yeah, very successful in Barcelona, of course. Yeah. Next, on May 10th, 1989, Brazil takes on Peru at Fortaleza. So Brazil will win this match 4-1. Zé de Carmo scored in the 9th minute, Bebeto in the 22nd minute, and Charles scored in the 54th and 81st minute, and Carlos Torres replied for Peru in the 61st minute. So for this match, we have the following lineup. Acacio, Jorginho captain again, Marcelo Kiramichian of Corinthians, Brazilian of Armenian ancestry, who also played at Olympique Lyonnais. This was his first cap, and he'll be replaced by Mauro Galvão of Botafogo in the 74th minute. And Mauro Galvão is a crucial player of the Lazaroni era, which we'll discuss further. Then we have Andre Cruz, another debutant, Madzinho of Vasco da Gama. Zé de Carmo, he replaced by Cristóvão in the 61st minute. Bismarck, Bobo, he replaced by debutant Zé Carlos of Bahia in the 80th minute. Bebeto, Charles, another debutant, two-goal debutant. He'd be replaced by Vivinho in the 84th minute. Zinho, and he'd be replaced by Edu Manga of Palmeiras in the 61st minute. This was Zé de Carmo's final cap, fourth and final cap. His first cap had been 1988. And as well as Vivinho. This was his final cap, and all his caps were in 1989. This was his fourth cap. Next, on May 24th, this time Peru hosts Brazil at Lima. This match ended as a 1-1 tie. Cristóvão gave Brazil the lead in 29th minute, and Peru replied a minute later by Martin Dal Orso. So for this match, you have in goal international debutant Zé Carlos of Flamengo, Jorginho again, captain again, Mauro Galvão, Andre Cruz, Madzinho. He'd be replaced by Nelsinho of Sao Paulo in the 78th minute. Bismarck. He'd be replaced by international debutant Nilson of Internacional Porto Alegre in the 68th minute. Bernardo, Bobo, he replaced by Edu Manga in the 68th minute, Zé Carlos, Cristóvão, and Zinho. So for Bobo, this was his third and final cap, all of them in 1989. After these initial matches, where he seems to install the likes of Jorginho, Aldair into his main lineup, now we come to a tour of Europe in June, where Brazil has a couple of friendlies against Portugal and Switzerland, and they participate in the Danish Federation's centenary tournament. So for some of these matches, Lazaroni has access to some of the players, especially the Portuguese-based players, but again, not the likes of Romario, Careca, and other big names. So this first match against Portugal in June is actually still in Brazil at Maracana at Rio for the 75th anniversary of the Brazilian Federation. So for this match, Brazil wins 4-0. Bebeto scores in the 26th minute. Sobrinho's own goal in the 32nd minute gave Brazil the second goal. Ricardo scored in the 47th minute and Charles in the 74th minute. So for this match, Brazil starts with Acacio, Jorginho captain. He'd be replaced by 1986 World Cup veteran Branco, who at this point was playing for Porto in Portugal in the 66th minute. Moser of Benfica. He'd be replaced by Aldair in the 86th minute. Ricardo of Benfica. Madzinho. Silas of Sporting Club in Portugal. He'd be replaced by Giovanni in the 64th minute. Bernardo, Edu Manga. He'd be replaced by Cristóvão in the 64th minute. Bebeto. He'd be replaced by Zé Carlos in the 79th minute. Charles and Valdo of Benfica. This was Zé Carlos's third and final cap, all of them in 1989. And we have to remind everyone, this was not the best Portuguese side. They were missing some of their main stars. So not much can be judged from this performance for Brazil. So now, as I said, Brazil now travels to Europe to participate in the Denmark Federation Centenary Tournament, as well as a match against Switzerland. So the first match on June 16th is against Sweden at Copenhagen as part of this DBU Centenary. Sweden wins this match 2-1. Stefan Reh scores in the 26th minute, and Roger Leung scores a penalty kick in the 49th minute. Brazil reply in the 79th minute through Cristóvão. So for this match, you have Acacio, Paulo Roberto of Vasco da Gama. He was recalled for the first time since 1983 for this match. André Cruz, Ricardo captaining Brazil, Branco, Silas. He'd be replaced by Bismarck in the 73rd minute. Bernardo, Edu Manga. He'd be replaced by Giovanni in the 46th minute. Careca the second, not to be confused with Antonio Careca of Napoli. This Careca played for Cruzeiro. He'd be replaced by Gerson of Atlético Mineiro in the 68th minute. This was his first cap. Charles, he'd be replaced by Cristóvão in the 46th minute, and Valdo. A couple of days later, on June 18th, Brazil faced their Danish hosts at Copenhagen. And Denmark wins 4-0. Morten Olsen scores on a penalty kick in the 29th minute. Michael Laudrup scores 2 goals in the 54th and 62nd minute, and Lars Olsen in the 67th minute. So for Brazil, we have Acacio playing his 7th and final cap, all of them in 1989. Paulo Roberto, André Cruz, Ricardo the captain, Branco, he'd be replaced by Madzinho in the 64th minute. Giovanni, Bernardo, This was his fifth and final cap for Bernardo. Then you have Bismarck. He'd be replaced by Charles in the 74th minute. Cristóvão. He'd be replaced by Silas in the 64th minute. Gerson. He'd be replaced by Careca II in the 85th minute. This was Careca's eighth and final cap. His first cap was in 1988. And Valdo, and he'd be replaced by Edu Manga in the 74th minute. And this was Edu Manga's ninth and final cap. First cap was in 1987. Now we come for the last match on the tour on June 21st against Switzerland at Basel. And this would be another loss for Brazil, 1-0 with a penalty kick by Tubile Turkilmaz in the 50th minute. So for this match, Tafarel makes his return to the national team. Tafarel, who at this point was playing for Internacional Porto Alegre. And he'll be the mainstay in the Brazilian net into the next decade. Paulo Roberto, playing his sixth and final cap. His first cap, we mentioned, was in 1983. He'd be replaced by Branco in the 74th minute. Andre Cruz, Ricardo, captain of the team. Mazinho. Carlos Dunga, making his return to the Brazilian national team. At this point, he was playing for Fiorentina in Italy. Ricardo Alemão, Maradona and Careca's teammate at Napoli. Again, this was his return to the national team. Valdo. Renato Gaucho, who at this point he was playing at Roma in Italy. Gerson. He replaced by Giovanni in the 74th minute. And veteran from the Tele Santana era, Tita, who at this point was playing at Pescara in Italy. So a very disappointing tour, all in all, for Brazil.
Yeah, yes. So what I like to highlight is or point out is that one, Denmark had a great team. So that victory, I remember watching that game, and I love to see Lauder brothers playing. They were amazing players. I think Elker. I'm not sure if this is the pronunciation, the right pronunciation, but it was how we said in Brazil. Elker Larsen, the
Yes.
midfielder,
Preben
right?
Elker, yeah. Preben Elker.
Yeah, Elker. So I think he was not at the game, right? If
No,
I'm not
he had
mistaken.
retired from the national team after the 1988 Euros. Yeah.
Yes. So as you can see, as I said before, you see that Europe had very good teams. Not only like the traditional teams like Germany, France, Italy, England. Uh, so we saw Denmark, Belgium during the 80s. So it was to reinforce my reasoning. Now it's easy to talk about this because we can clearly see what happened in the past. But at that moment, I think they didn't realize that the football was changing. I mean, it was it became very popular, not only in a few countries, but it was kind of popular, becoming more popular among all other countries around the world, worldwide. So, so we started to see very good teams besides the big teams, or the most famous teams like Denmark. So it reinforces my reasoning about the tactics and the players available for Brazil during that time. So if you take a look at the Brazilian team, you see that we had most players playing in Brazil, not the European stars, right? So they were not prepared. I mean, they were not mature enough to face good teams in Europe. So in my opinion, those defeats, despite the Lazzaroni beginning, that he had to adapt the tactic, not only the tactics, but he had to choose between players that have never played for the national team before, and it's a and we should point out that the pressure on those players on that team was huge because of the defeats that occurred in 82 and 86. So the atmosphere, the environment was not proper to work or develop a new team. So to summarize, that those defeats were a mix of lack of good players, especially on midfield, a lack of tactics because it was a work in progress at that moment, and also the good teams that Europeans had. Switzerland had on you said Chapuisat, the
Yes.
striker, very famous, very good player. Sweden, Thomas Ravelli, the goalkeeper that played the 1994 semifinal game against Brazil. Summarizing, the Brazilian team was a work in progress, but the Europeans were very good. So that combination was a disaster for Brazil.
Yeah, as you say, it was an understrength Brazil team, but was there still pressure on Lazaroni because of these bad results?
Oh yeah, so those results that led Lazaroni to adopt the sweeper for the Copa America, America's Cup, in later on. Because of those results, my opinion is because of the lack of good midfielders, Brazil was not able to put pressure on the opponents, pressure enough to keep them, on a defensive position. So as Brazil wasn't able to keep the possession to involve the other team on Brazil style. So the other team had the opportunity to counterattack or to attack Brazil. So that is something that led Lazzaroni to, and the press and public put pressure on him to reinforce the defensive line because of those results. So because of that, Lazzaroni adopted the sweeper, and the press and public in general put pressure on him to do so.
It's strange because this was a system. The sweeper system was completely foreign in Brazil. And this was a position that Mauro Galvão, the man chosen to carry out this task, was unfamiliar with. Despite the pressure, was there not a risk to employ a libero at such a stage?
Yeah, oh, yeah, for sure, because the Brazilian tactics until that time were 4-4-2 and 4-3-3. But even the 4-4-2 was a variation of during the game it became a 4-3-3 because the Brazilians midfielder, for example, Zico was practically a striker. He was always in the box. He helped it in the midfield, developing the game, developing the plays, but his presence in the area was very common. And not only him, so a lot of midfielders in Brazil during that time used to play just like Zico. So it was a risk because we never played that way. So Lazzaroni tried to, I'm not sure, but I believe because of the lack of high skilled midfielders, so the sweeper was giving him the option to attack by the sides, right? So he had or preferred to have sided midfielders, which is basically a role that was played by Branco and Jorginho, and they were defenders back, right? So because of the lack of midfielders, I believe he preferred to use the sweeper and that allowed those players, Branco and Jorginho, to go more often to the attack
Yeah,
because we
overlapping
didn't have
defenders. Yeah.
overlapping defenders. Yes, because we didn't have enough or high skilled midfielders as we used to have in the past. Actually, I don't like to say that because it seems that those players like Valdo, Giovanni, and so on were not good enough. They were, but I believe they were not ready. They were not mature enough to hold the pressure of those defeats, the defeats that we previously spoke about. So Lazzaroni adopted the system to try to remediate the problem that he had on the midfield. So it was a risk because of that. Because in Brazil we say that players have a tactics memory, right? So sometimes they play by instinct because always do the same thing. They always do they can read the game very easy because they played it just as they used to play since the lower categories until the professional level. So when you change the tactics like that, when you use especially the libero, which is something, it's not only the third defender, right? It's a defender that was free to play in the midfield in several positions, helping the midfielders and so on. So it definitely was a risk for him to adapt this kind of tactic.
So it was a 5-3-2 basically with Mauro Galvao as sweeper, two stoppers, usually Ricardo and Aldair, and then the two overlapping defenders, Jorginho or Mazinho and Branco.
Yes.
So, ahead of the Copa America, the other main controversy was Lazzaroni's decision to discard Bahia striker Charles. How was this decision received, and what were the consequences?
Well, Charles was at that moment he was probably the main striker of Brazil because he just had became Brazilian national champion with Bahia, right? The pressure to have Charles on the team, mainly for the northeast of Brazil, was very big on Lazzaroni, and and actually because the European stars were not available most of the time, so the other states, the press and public corroborated, get together with the Bahia's people opinion about Charles to having him on the team. So when Lazzaroni decided to taking off the team, he faced a lot of problems, especially during the first games in Copa America, which by coincidence was in the Northeast. Actually, the first phase of the Copa America was in the happening in the Northeast of Brazil, Salvador and Recife, right? So it became a big problem for him to handle the situation at the point that the critics use this to improve or to criticize him even more, not only because of the player itself himself, but the atmosphere during that period was really bad by the public and press in Northeast, and that affected the atmosphere in the team. So the team played very, very bad during those games.
And we have to remind everyone that Luis Mueller, who at this point was playing at Torino, he arrived like 3 days before the start of the Copa America, and Lazzaroni felt he was not ready for the Copa America. And he also called up Baltazar, who was having a very good season at Atletico Madrid that season. In fact, he became Pichichi that season. And but that would be the last we would see of Baltazar. with Brazil. But getting into the Copa America with the backdrop of the Charles controversy, because he was from Bahia and many felt, expected that he had to play because of that. So Brazil were roundly booed for their first matches. So the first match against Venezuela on July 1st at Salvador. Brazil won this match 3-1. Bebeto would score in the second minute. Giovanni would score a penalty kick in the 36th minute, and Baltazar would score in the 57th minute. And Venezuela's goal was scored by Carlos Maldonado. And this would be the only goal that Brazil would concede at the Copa America. But Brazil started with Tafarel, Mazinho, Ricardo as captain, Mauro Galvão, Andre Cruz, Giovanni, Valdo, Branco, Tita. He was replaced by Silas in the 11th minute after Tita was injured. And he would miss the rest of the Copa America. Bebeto, he'd be replaced by Baltazar in the 46th minute. And Romario playing his first match of the year for Lazaroni. And at this point, he had joined PSV Eindhoven in Holland. So Bebeto himself was also in the second goal that led to the penalty kick by Giovanni. Bebeto was also injured by the Venezuelan goalkeeper, and he held on until halftime, but was replaced by Baltazar, who was playing for Brazil for the first time since 1981. The match stands out for the hostile reception of Brazilians who were roundly booed. Brazilian players were roundly booed. Fans threw projectiles onto the field to such a point that the teams were unable to take the official photos. And Brazilian substitutes were heckled and they were forced to leave. All in all, it was a hostile atmosphere, and it would continue for the rest of these first round matches. As far as the matters on the field, Lazaroni was unable to include Aldair as he was ill, so Andre Cruz deputized for him. And Mazinho started in place of Jorginho, and he would be one of the revelations of this Copa America.
Baltazar, he was playing in the position that Charles is supposed to play, or I mean, that was the position that the people from Bahia expected to see Charles playing, right? And Baltazar, he missed a lot of goals during that game, so that increased the pressure for the people to claim for Charles on Baltazar's place. And also you we can tell that the atmosphere was really bad. Bahia, that stadium, that venue, I think the capacity at that time was around 1,300,000 people, and I think only 5 or 10,000 people went to see the game because they were mad at the situation that not having Charles as the main striker.
Another interesting aspect of this match was Dunga and Renato's trek from Italy to arrive to this match. They had played in a UEFA qualification match between Fiorentina and Roma. So after which, and in that match, Fiorentina had defeated Roma 1-0. So after the match, they drove together from Perugia to Milan to take a plane to Rio. At 5 a.m. Rio time, they boarded another plane to Salvador. And after all that, when they arrived, they both sat on the bench. But because I assume they must have been exhausted. So Lazaroni did not want to risk them.
All the European players were exhausted or injured for that Copa America. So this is something that didn't help Lazaroni on the beginning.
We have to remind ourselves that Following the 1988 Olympics, Giovanni is being groomed as the next great Brazilian star. And he would fail to impress in this Copa America and would ultimately be discarded. Can you describe his trajectory?
Yeah, so this is something that we never know what it will be. I mean, the story will be if the Giovanni had played with somebody else helping him in the midfield, right? Because he was an amazing player. I remember to watch the games of the Brazilian tournament during those years, and Giovanni was always being mentioned as the biggest midfielder during those years. And he was very skilled, high skilled indeed, right? So he played for Vasco. After that, he went to Italy, if I'm not mistaken, to
Bologna.
Bologna,
Yes.
right? And so again, he was not mature enough to carry that responsibility because of the big midfielders that we had in the past, right? So on top of that, he was along with Valdo, the only and Silas, the three players that the most famous or most high skilled players during those years. And Silas was a young player as well. Valdo was not that experienced as well. So it was a generation that had to be more experienced to be more worked in terms of confidence, in terms of game, and the situation that changing the tactics didn't help. So Giovanni, in my opinion, his trajectory was amazing. He played very well during those years. Vasco won a championship with him, playing very good in 1989. By the way, yeah, Vasco won the championship of 1989, and he played very well. He played very well in the previous years as well when Vasco won two championships in a row against the Flamengo that had a big team during those years. So Giovanni was indeed a very good player. Maybe the lack of talent on that generation didn't help him to achieve a superstar level because this is something very important that players they didn't become a star from they don't become a star overnight, right? So it's a work that you got to work little by little. I remember to see Ronaldo, the phenomenal playing in Brazil against my team. I see him several times. I saw him several times local at the stadium live, and we could tell that he was a very good player. But I could never imagine that he would become one of the biggest players ever. So this is something that should be developed little by little. And maybe Giovanni haven't had the opportunity with players on his side playing with him to develop this. That's what I think.
Yeah. So 2 days later, after the Venezuela match, on July 3rd at the same venue, Brazil take on Peru. So again, under the same hostile atmosphere. So this match would end as a scoreless tie. Brazil started with Tafarel. Almao started ahead of Mazzino. Aldar was back in the side. Ricardo was captain. Mauro Galvao, Dunga, Giovanni, Valdo, Branco. He replaced by Renato Gaucho in the 59th minute, Bebeto, and Romario, and he'd be replaced by Baltazar in the 68th. On July 7th, Brazil take on Colombia at the same venue. So for this match would also end as a scoreless tie. So for this match, we have Tafarel, Alemão, He replaced by Mazinho in the 64th minute. Aldair, Mauro Galvao, Ricardo, Dunga, Giovanni, Branco, Renato Gaucho, Baltazar. He replaced by Bebeto in the 57th minute and Valdo. This was Baltazar's seventh and final cap. His first cap had been in 1980. So, after all the troubles at Salvador, Brazil played their final match at Recife on July 9th against Paraguay. For this match, that Brazil win 2-0 to advance to the next round. Bebeto scored both of Brazil's goals in the 47th and 82nd minute. Brazil start with Tafarel, Mazinho, Aldair, Mauro Galvao, Ricardo, Dunga, Silas, Branco, Bebeto, Romario. He'd be replaced by Renato Gaucho in the 78th minute and Valdo. This was the group phase, and the final phase was to be at Maracana.
This was the turning point of the Lazaroni campaign because there is a rivalry, a local rivalry between Bahia and Pernambuco, the two states in the northeast of Brazil, and this rivalry helped him or helped the team to get back or to build up the confidence for the next stage. As soon as the seleção arrived in Recife, they saw a sign saying, "Welcome back to Brazil," because of the atmosphere that the seleção faced on Salvador, because of the things that we already mentioned. So, in that game, the players played very relaxed, and so that helped them to develop the game and win the game. Well, not I wouldn't say easily, but easier than it was before, while considering the three previous matches. And another thing is that game was so important that from that point on, I don't know if somebody mentioned that to you guys before, but from that point, from that moment on, every time when the Brazilian team had problems with the public or the press, they assigned Recife to be the venue of and to receive the team because they saw it, they saw that place as the place that could be another turning point. And it happened again in 1993, I believe, when Brazil faced a bad situation while the qualification for the World Cup.
Oh, I didn't know that. So Recife is like the refuge. Teams in trouble.
Yes, yes. Whenever they see a problem with the because Brazil is a big country, right? So you always will see people complaining about the team, like, oh, we should the seleção should have selected people from my state or my team, right? And Recife didn't demand that during those years. And from now and from that moment on, when the seleção faced a problem because of this, because some states were requiring players from that specific state in the team, and if they went to play in São Paulo, the pressure was for players from São Paulo. If they play in Minas, Belo Horizonte, same thing, Rio Grande do Sul, and so on. So Recife, it's not only that Recife didn't demand the players from that area, but also the public in Recife is also known as the people from Bahia. The supporters are very are known as they always go to the game, they always support the teams, and so that's why they pick Recife as a refugee for the bad moments.
And another significant point about the match against Paraguay was that Lazaroni found his standard formation for the rest of the tournament, and he's on his settled squad basically from this match onwards. And Brazil would play with the same starting formation for the rest of the tournament. The final round was to be at the final group phase. Final round would be at Maracana, and it would comprise Brazil, Maradona's Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. So Brazil's first match in his final group phase was against Argentina on July 12th at Maracana. And this was a match where Brazil would win 2-0, and which was a key win against the defending World Cup champions and set them on course to win this Copa. And Bebeto in the 48th minute and Romario in the 55th minute would score Brazil's winners. And Romario and Bebeto were now the frontline spearhead of Brazil, and very successful and very complimentary. So again, for this match again, Brazil started with Tafarel, Mazinho, Aldair, Mauro Galvão, Ricardo, captain of the side, Silas, he replaced by Alemão in the 75th minute, Dunga, Branco, Bebeto, Romario, he replaced by Renato Gaucho in the 75th minute, and Valdo. Next, 2 days later, again at Maracana on July 14th, Brazil faced Paraguay again. And this time it would be 3-0. Bebeto scored twice in the 16th and the 53rd minute, and Romario in the 60th minute. And again, Brazil started with Tafarel, Mazinho, Aldair, Mauro Galvão, Ricardo, Silas, Dunga, Valdo. He replaced by Alemão in the 73rd minute, Branco, Bebeto, Romario, and he replaced by Renato Gaucho in the 73rd minute. So Brazil's building up confidence. The final group match is against Uruguay. And ironically, it's on the same day, 39 years later, after the 1950 World Cup final at the same venue. So Brazil take on Uruguay, who were level on points. So the winner would become the Copa America champion. So it was a de facto final, but even though it was just like the 1950 match, it was not an actual final. This match, Brazil would win 1-0. Romario scoring in the 49th minute to give Brazil the Copa America and its first title of any kind since the 1970 World Cup win. And again, going through the lineup, it's a standard lineup now. Tafarel, Mazinho, Aldair, Mauro Galvão, Ricardo's captain, Silas, he replaced by Alemão in 85th minute, Dunga, Branco, Bebeto, Romario, Valdo, and he'd be replaced by Josimar in the 86th minute. Brazil were champions.
Yes. Well, another important thing that I should mention about this final phase is that so as Lazaroni was basically supported by the Rio de Janeiro fans, right? He had been champion with Vasco and Flamengo. And if you take a brief look at the players, most of them are from Rio de Janeiro. So the locals were supportive in terms of the team and the press as well, because the press of Rio, of course, were claiming for players from Rio. So the atmosphere was very, very good for Lazaroni and the team. Despite the fact that the confidence started to be built up in Recife after the victory against Paraguay. I remember to watch those games that it was kind of a new season. It looked like it was two different teams. And you can tell if you watch the games now, probably there are some games in YouTube, you see that it looked like completely different teams, although the teams were the same because the players played more relaxed, the confidence was up, right? It looked like another season, a new season. It looked like the games in Northeast, in Salvador, had happened like a year before that phase. So that describes the atmosphere for the final phase. So the players were confident, the public was confident and also supporting the team. So everything combined for a perfect environment to become a champion again. The only thing that I know, and you already mentioned that, is the Brazil would face Uruguay, which is something that they always mention in Brazil, the Maracanazo in 1950. So that was something. I remember that the game against Uruguay, we feared most than the game against Argentina. They were the current champions of the world during that time, right? So the game against Uruguay, I remember the atmosphere and the public. We were, afraid of more from Uruguay than Argentina itself.
Yes, so this obviously was the first title since 1970. Was there still criticism of Lazaroni, or were his ideas now accepted after this victory?
I would say that people and press had realized that that was the best team that we could have. Lazzaroni was not, at least for some people, was not the best option, but he achieved a good result. So the criticism stopped for a while, took a break for a couple months because he had achieved the goals that we had during that year. And the Copa America against Argentina, the world champion, and Uruguay, which is always an opponent that is respected in Brazil. So that gave him, or that gave Lazzaroni like a couple months of peace to work on the team for the upcoming matches or competition.
This concludes the first part of the interview with Mr. Cunha. We'll continue with the second part next time, discussing the World Cup qualifiers and the World Cup preparations in the second half of 1989.